Welcome back. In the previous episode we talked about episode 18 and Asa and Kaede's growing developments, and it's time we really got into that. So, character focus, Kaede. I know he's not mine, he's never been mine, but I need to keep loving him. Like with Sia and Narune, the best way to examine Kaede's character is via her arc, which so seamlessly acts as a character study, as well as a highly compelling and grounded narrative. Like the others, Kaede is suffering from an illness, in her case an extreme form of codependency syndrome. Among mental conditions, this one's actually quite common in anime, being the usual reason for a yandere's actions. But where shows like Mirai Nikki try to make this almost acceptable and romantic, Shuffle has other ideas. As we will discuss, this need to have Rin rely on her is all that supports Kaede. We've already mentioned how her room is barren of any hobbies, and her talent at cooking is solely motivated by her need to impress Rin. She quite literally lives for him. It isn't as simple as a lack of confidence or a need for attention. She quite literally cannot live without him. To rely on her. It's extremely unhealthy and has left one heck of a mark on her psyche. But how did this happen? Episode 19 starts with hints towards the answer. In usual Shuffle fashion, throughout the show we've periodically had hints to a darker story behind Rin and Kaede. From both Rin's parents and Kaede's mother being dead at the onset of the series, to Rin's unsettling dreams that we only catch glimpses of from time to time. When Kaede asks about these said dreams in prior episodes, the questions came off as inconsequential. But once episode 19 starts, we realise she might have been more sincere in her inquiries. Episode 19's very first shot post the title sequence is of a young Rin and Kaede standing in flashback rain. Again, I should preface by saying I'm no expert in cinematography and shot composition, but even I can take note of some really great techniques at work here. One that's super common, but highly effective, and used a lot in this arc particularly, is the distance between the two characters, as they are placed at opposite sides of the screen, but it goes a little further than just that. Kaede's hair tone is dulled notably during the flashbacks, and even the illumination offered by the street lights and the shop window fronts are scaled down. This all drags our attention to the negative space between them foremost. In doing so, it accentuates the distance between them far more than just placing them far apart would have done. After your eye is drawn to the two as individuals, who you almost don't recognise as the characters we've come to know, they hold themselves in an almost limp posture. No emotion showing as they stare silently at one another until Kaede breaks the silence, striding forward a few steps, and the shot cuts to yet another great close-up. I wish you were dead. I mean it. Just die. The animation is short but incredibly sweet, with another great filter on it to slightly alter the style, and with some great quick cuts before we're back in the almost brightly lit bedroom of Rin's. It's worth mentioning here about the incredibly economic way in which Shuffle covers its arcs. Narune, Primula and Licorice are collectively covered in just about 3 episodes as a group, with extra development for Rin to boot. Sia in 2 episodes and Asa in 2.5-ish. All in all, the show manages to give highly complete and satisfactory arcs in as small an amount of time as possible, and that to me is because of how it manages its characters. Allow me to elaborate. In most visual novels, shows, a concession is made, as it's important to understand that in most of those show's source materials, you pursue one girl's route at a time, meaning in any VN adaptation, as each girl is explored, she is then phased out as the protagonist moves on to the next chapter. Let me be clear on this. I've got no issue with that. I love Canon and Clannad, Grizia and School Days, but I can appreciate the hustle Shuffle puts in order to hold on to its whole cast. No one is hospitalised, nobody moves to France in the last quarter, nor does the protagonist have to move away with just the chosen girl. Those examples are by no means bad things, as they benefit the stories being told, and in most cases those sideline characters will get to come back in the finale or OVA material, but there is definitely an advantage to Shuffle's method. For one, as mentioned earlier, the likes of Narune get to keep developing in small ways during the background of others' arcs, but more importantly it allows for the great sense of foreshadowing and natural progression that I've referenced to at length. During Primula's arc you get multiple references to Kikyo, not in words but through actions and animation. During episode 10's focus on Sia, you get leading lines from Narune and even spooky moments from Kaede. In every arc you get examples of Asa's illness playing a role. The point is, by never relegating any of them out of the plot, it means each character, even if it's just in small ways, gets a great screen presence. Maybe the best example of this is the economy of this economy is episode 16's start. We see Rin and Kaede say goodbye to Primula on their way to school. This is pretty much her only scene in the episode, and it's used to show how she's already developed from the previous arc, by having her wear more adult clothing. It's simple, only a couple of seconds long, but highly effective at implanting ideas in an attentive viewer's mind. What all this leads to is the natural feel of the drama that I keep blagging on about. When Kikyo manifests, it doesn't feel sudden. By the same measure, when throughout this arc, from Rin's dreams to his and Kaede's backstory, to Kaede's unhealthy tendencies growing worse, and even the subplot about Primula's neglect, none of it feels forced for the sake of drama, but rather feels like it was always inevitable, and that is by far my favourite form any drama can take. Another cousin of how this works is something we've already mentioned. This episode's title card is completely different to any other, just a simple, small line of almost logical, uncaring text. It's a neat touch, as I mentioned when discussing episode 18. I really like these sorts of little Easter eggs or references that benefit towards the main story being told or the tone of the episode in question. The next talking point on Kaede is on Kaede doing the washing up. Not on her face or the room she's in, but a close-up on her doing the dishes. It's a nice reminder that she's both trying to be the idealized Japanese housewife and that her work is everything to her. It's followed by another shot that mirrors many of the others we've already seen. We have Kaede and Primula standing on one side of the room with Rin by the doorway. The distance between them feels like a present-day version of the flashback sequence we just saw. The once again static camera angle of the shot reminds us of the dollhouse ghostly analogue episode 6 presented for Primula, and the slightly awkward feeling of the whole thing is reminiscent of the Kikyo date in episode 17. Kaede's face is drawn minimally throughout, for what should by now be an obvious reason, and before the scenes close she steps away even further from Rin and Rimu. Primula has returned to her aforementioned post-episode 15 attire, indicating that she'll be relative and something of a supportive rock for Kaede in this arc. Rin says he'll skip the breakfast that's been so prominently placed in the foreground of the still shot, as Kaede steps partially off screen in what is another brilliant use of the house's architectural design. As Rin leaves, we get some more brilliant voice work from Carrie Savage, as Kaede tries to hold up her composure in front of Primula. They go as far as to use the hanging racks to obscure our view of Kaede's eyes and face, adding further to this sense of her loss of control. A large part of the episode is, as mentioned, flashbacks, and one point which I really love is how Shuffle turns the normal "our parents are off on an elongated business trip for an undisclosed length of time" into a central part of its storytelling, turning that trope on its head by having the parents just literally being dead. While these flashbacks occur, what we're shown in the present day is Kaede tidying and attending to other house chores on a sort of autopilot, which carries its own form of spookiness, like a grey lady. The whole flashback sequence is treated far differently from those we've seen before. In Primula's case, we were viewing her trance-like coma dreams. With Narane, she acted as a narrator, guiding us and Rin along. But here we seemingly dispense of that, with the flashbacks seemingly being the painful recollection of memories from either Kaede or Rin, or both, respective perspectives. This in turn gives them a more scathing, raw feeling. The framing of these scenes almost makes us as the viewer feel like an intruder into someone's darkened mind, rather than it simply being a flashback. These flashbacks are maybe the most telling information we get on both Kaede and Rin's personalities, and how they're informed by their respective pasts. We talked a little about it at the start of this essay, but the characters of Shuffle seldom fall properly into any archetypes, Rin included. In Kaede's case, her archetype is the yandere, a term coined to describe a character whom obsesses over her love interest, often going as far as to scare off or even murder potential romance rivals. As I said before, Kaede's diagnosis of dependency syndrome is also pretty on the money when it comes to being a yandere. However, keeping with the idea of her being a person first, not just an archetype, Kaede ends up breaking some of the conventions of the trope. For one, she never actually kills anyone, but she definitely does go to some extremes. The obvious one is her outburst against Asa in episode 19/20. But you'd be foolish to ignore the greater extremes she goes to, straight up offering her body to appease Rin in episode 20. It's a raw scene that maybe hits harder than a normal murder scene might have, but to me, this is what solidifies her as one of my favourite murderous love interests. The show doesn't feel compelled to have her commit an act she can never make up for, and that's really important. Both as an element of her character and a theme of the show, retribution and hope for a better future are integral. The actions Kaede takes are incredibly immoral, as she breaks the trust of everyone she cares about most. but she never goes so far that she can't come back from it. I've mentioned it already, but as a part of the show's core, it's never as harsh as something like School Days is, where it looks to critique and take the extreme worst routes. Shuffle is more content to show an alternative. We already talked about how Sia's character revolves around coming to accept her own self-worth as a person, and the same can be said of Kaede. She needs to learn to accept herself and live for more than just Rin. Her actions mean she falls the lowest of the group, but Shuffle wants to show us how even then there are still people who care about her. There is still somewhere for her to go. With that said, were it not for Primula, this could have gone a much darker path. Refer to School Days, for example. Without her then, after Kaede's outburst, there would have been, initially at least, no one there for her. Kaede's fears that she was nothing without Rin almost proved to be true, adding a wonderfully somber layer of tragedy as the emotionally stagnant younger girl is placed in the unenviable position of being Kaede's saviour. As a character is both extreme yet highly relatable. We can all understand her feelings of isolation and her drive to be useful. Her existential fear of being abandoned again are poignant, and that's why I love her arc. Like how Sia's illness is humanized by having Kikyo be simply trying to do the best to help. By having us sympathize with Kaede, the show once more tells us it's okay not to be okay. Her actions need to be condemned, but the show goes further, asking, what next after condemnation? Just casting her aside accomplishes little, even if arguably it's what she deserves. And there's the point. We're once more back to the central message of whether always doing what's morally right is for the best. Retribution is also a theme of Kaede's character when talking about her backstory. After abusing Rin for literally years on end, she realizes her mistake and the extent of her seemingly irredeemable actions against her closest friend and honorary brother. She takes it upon herself to dedicate her whole life to making up for it. On a narrative level, I don't think I've ever come across a better reason for a character to be so dedicated to the harem protagonist, nor have I ever seen a better explanation of the dependency syndrome yandere trope anywhere else. Quite simply, it's brilliant. To summarise, while Kaede may come across as a pseudo-murderous tragic heroine, in truth her story is all about retribution and coming to love yourself. Kaede could never truly be with Rin as she is, because she doesn't love or understand herself. It's a character art about acknowledging her own unhealthy behaviours and learning to move on from them, and it's an arc that preaches that even at our worst, there is always some hope of retribution, always someone who will care for you, even if you don't know it or appreciate that fact. With that section of our study into Kaede's character over, let's jump back into the flashback setting and have a closer look at the scene and illustrate some of the themes I mentioned in our above study. The rest of episode 19. To give a brief one of those dreaded synopses, what we witness is Kaede become a completely despondent over the loss of her recently deceased mother, until Rim claims the accident was his fault, causing her to abuse him for some time until realizing her mistransgressions. Firstly, let's give quick mention to Kaede's hospitalization, which, while I could be wrong, I've always interpreted this as being a manic depressive episode. For those not in the know, certain forms of depression can cause a patient to completely stop functioning. They're not comatose as such, but it's more than simply losing the will to go on. It's an interesting depiction, and a similar event happens in Grizia, though that particular one includes PTSD for added good measure. This culminates in a hospital room we look in from the place of the door. The room is completely dark, only lit shadowily by the dim artificial light of the monitoring equipment. Then young Rin opens the door, and it lets in the light. Rin proceeds to lie, claiming the accident was his fault, and Kaede's reaction is to assault Rin, attempting to strangle the child. The next shot is one I really love. It's simply that of Rin nursing his neck. In the background, we can hear a jubilant father in tears over his daughter's sudden recovery. But what we're seeing is something much more opaque. It's a running theme motif throughout the show, and maybe no more so than here, where we're watching a child's first step into an extremely abusive neglect, while the words being spoken are those of love and attention. As I've mentioned in similar scenes prior, it causes an eerie dissonance without the need for any jump scares or shocking visuals. It's also an almost mundane camera shot, and I love it. Moving along, we see this abuse carried further as we watch the two grow up. There's plenty more great uses of the house that we've come to know as a safe place being turned into one of a horror movie or abuse victim's story setting, with younger versions of Kaede casting shadows over every single light source she can find. To bring up the show's wonderful use of clothes once more, I especially like how we're never given a straightforward timeline of the series of events unfurling. Instead, we can gather how much time has passed based on the clothing, namely the uniforms the two are wearing. It makes for more efficient storytelling and keeps the flashbacks from losing its tone and momentum by having exposition to explain any of this or narration hampering the unnerving feel of the scene. Instead, we just look at the uniform and we can tell they're getting older, their heights too, because they're sort of at that age. Now, and say it with me, everyone, we come to another of my favourite set pieces from the show. Ha, you thought I'd say scene again, didn't you? We will talk momentarily about the decision which Rin made in deciding to take on Kaede's burden, and as to whether it was selfish or altruistic. But at first, let's be a little less specific. As mentioned, Kaede finds the postcard from her mother in Rin's room, revealing the truth of why she was on her way home during that fatal day, to come see an ill Kaede. This crushes her as she realises just how terrible a person she's been to Rin. She rushes from the house with a lovely added detail of not having time to put on her shoes, and finds herself on a roadside. Tripping, she's faced with the same fate as her mother, an oncoming traffic accident. But this time it's different. Before a young truck coon gets the opportunity to isekai Kaede, Rin reaches out. It's Rin's presence that saves her. This next bit... My cat won't shut up. This next bit is what really makes it for me. The camera fixes some ways off the side of the bridge, suspended in the air. The score plays a new variation, to the best of my knowledge. It's never played before or again. It's got an almost childlike instrumental reminiscence of Clanad's score. Never mind this came first. As the shot pulls gradually back for a decent passage of time, it is all accompanied by Kaede's voice repeating the words, "I'm sorry," on loop. Aside from the obvious, this scene thoroughly hammers home why Kaede is the way she is, but also why Rin could never love her as a partner. She was abusive to him for years, but more importantly, this moment cements that she's more of a troublesome little sister to him than a potential spouse. I also mentioned during the intermission that Kaede's voice performance is my favourite, and here's another great example of it, really helping to accentuate this brilliant scene. So that's episode 9, only halfway through. Indeed, episode 19 is an episode that's just packed with more important details and great shots, and now seems like an appropriate time as any to make clear Primula's role in this arc. Like we've now come to expect, Primula serves more than one purpose in this part of the show. On the one hand, she's used to further communicate, or to further continue the family unit metaphor, but interestingly, like the others, as a character she's still growing. Her arc may have ended in episode 15, but real people don't just flip a switch and become fully developed. To the same extreme, Primula's development is a slow burn. I've already mentioned her change in clothing, but it's in Kaede's arc that we get to see her properly changing. Her newly fleshed out personality becomes vital to supporting Kaede in this arc, but her use as a child analogue certainly continues. It's something I've always thought was handled in a brilliantly subtle way. Like how Kaede abusing young Rin for years on end, she's in a sense inadvertently grooming Primula. Allow me to explain a little further. In the second half of the episode, while we still see many cuts of Kaede cleaning the house, we also get a few of Primula, with Kaede frequently asking her to help or do certain chores. I wouldn't go as far as to say this is point-blank grooming or anything to that measure, but instead it's used to show just how dangerous Kaede is if left unchecked. We've already discussed in part her attack on Asa and her prostitution stint, but I think the way Primula starts to act more and more like Kaede in this arc is also very telling. Kaede is having Primula do these things because she owes Rin. It's never stated outright, and that obviously isn't true, but it's a fascinating subplot that continues to add to Primula's theme of neglect. This furthers when Rin arrives home. He half-heartedly pats Primula on the head, his face obscured. If you look at Primula, she beams at this tiny modicum of attention. To us as an audience, it feels unnerving. She's becoming more like Kaede. For Rin, it adds that idea that his efforts to show them more affection are only causing them more heartache. Like most of the Primula-focused scenes and moments, it's short, subtle, and highly effective. My next point is related, though probably the one I'm least confident on in the whole essay, and I'm probably just reaching here. However, we witness Rin and Primula playing a game in front of the television. This at first seems innocuous, and then comical as we realise they're playing Pong, and we wonder to ourselves what century this is. Yet throughout the scene we're shown how little attention Rin is paying to Kaede and Primula, as he literally nods along, ignoring their conversation. It wouldn't therefore be surprising if they're playing the Pong game as another subliminal way to illustrate how little attention Rin is paying to either of them as they partake in the game. One could easily play, as they partake in a game, one could easily play half asleep. Heck, small detail, but the score is 4-2, meaning Primula is twice his score. I could, of course, be overthinking this particular point of interest, but the fact that everything else in Shuffle seems to hold a purpose does make me wonder about this particular Pong game inclusion, though it could have just been a cheap way to animate a TV screen. Getting a little bit closer to the definitive, we have some brilliant use of the soundscape. I've already mentioned how the OST has some original tracks in this episode, but its next trick is more quiet. We can see throughout the scene with the Pong game that Kaede is stirring a pot, but we don't see its contents. However, an attentive listener will notice the sound of the spoon is scraping against an empty pan. To me, this is far more chilling than simply playing a creepy track. Instead, it's something you might not even notice till the camera cuts to reveal the truth. Furthermore, it's far less dramatic than if she was sharpening a kitchen knife, instead going to show just how blank her mind is, how clouded it's become. Following shots continue that trend as the camera simply changes angle. There's no jump cut sound effect, no major swoon in the score, rapid close-ups or shaky cam. No, instead the camera just moves to a shot of the kitchen, a shot of Kaede, straight down the camera. This shot has struck me longer than any other horror shot except maybe some of the ones from Higurashi. It's not the type of shot to make your skin crawl, but instead just plain terrifying, and I absolutely love that. As if all this wasn't enough to show Kaede becoming broken, we get Rin making one very big, very crucial mistake a couple of scenes later. He rings to tell Kaede he won't be needing dinner, but what matters is his phrasing. In a moment of ultimate inconsiderate jackassery, Rin goes back on every promise he's made Kaede, in particular the promise from the very first Spotlight episode, and maybe one from much earlier. So I don't need you to. The rest of the sentence is inconsequential. This is most definitely the straw that breaks the camel's back. And going back on something I said earlier, while most watching are probably realizing that the shit's about to hit the fan, for some I think this scene is the one where we can really pity Kaede and understand her feelings, however corrupt and bankrupt they may be. Now, you'll all be glad to hear there are only 2 more scenes which I would list as favourites. That's not to say I won't still be gushing galore over the rest of what's left, but rather to put emphasis on just how good these 2 scenes are, and the one we now found ourselves at is a good contender, or a strong contender, for what I think is the strongest of them all, with only episode 12's Primula breakdown as competition. Technically speaking, Kaede's breakdown trounces Primula. The animation jumps massively in quality, and it always looks great to begin with. Additionally, the score plays its heart out as we get a distorted version of the everyday life theme. The scene also acts as the only possible climax for Kaede, and it's some glorious release of built-up tension, but I suppose we shouldn't get too far ahead of ourselves. I preface this scene with the short section on Primula's role because it comes into play in a big way here. While searching for Kaede, intending to apologise to her as she perceives Kaede's melancholy as her own fault, Primula checks in Rin's room only to find that Kaede has blacked Asa out of a series of pictures, classic yandere, that Rin took with her on a date. Primula's face drops, and all the while we get interspersed cuts of Rin and Asa returning home from another day out, with Kaede approaching to greet them. I love how we get the burgeoning stages of Rin and Asa's love life from Kaede's perspective as well. It's just a really great touch. Primula's reaction here is masterful. For one thing, the slow pace of her finding the photos is done expertly, and while in an actual horror movie you might find a notebook full of kill Asa or some such, the scribbling out pictures serves much the same purpose, but furthermore, it's the importance of this being Primula. While we've been watching her develop and change more and more, she's still in our mind the mute girl who displays no emotion. This isn't unheard of in anime. Yuki Nagato would be used to much the same effect in The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, wherein if she's panicked, then you really know it's something deadly. The point being, any of the characters could have been used for this moment, putting aside why they'd be in Kaede's house. But because it's Primula, it adds one more layer of tension to an already cooked to tipping point moment, when we see the emotionless girl react with such anxiety. Further on, this also puts us in Primula's perspective, with much of the following shots essentially being shot from an onlooker's point of view, and my, what shots. First off, Asa doesn't just enter the house, she bounds in with a skip and a jump. Keep in mind that Japan is a nation of extreme politeness. Even for good friends like these, Asa's disregard for conventions as she playfully salutes her way through the front door is completely out of line, especially when we consider how conversely traditionalist Kaede is known to be. With that said, I doubt this minor transgression of manners deserves what comes next, As mentioned, the animation abounds as the camera finally lifts itself from its stationary home and begins to shake violently alongside Kaede, who throws Asa against the door. As we talked about, the music is a warped version of what we're most used to, and there's a plethora of filming and animation tricks snuck in here that you won't even notice till a rewatch. My favourite of these is when the camera, at a slightly awkward low to the ground angle, hones in on Asa as she collapses in on herself, her illness now resurfacing once more. If you look closely, one of her eyes is actually shaking violently. It's really easy to miss, but your subconscious picks up on little details like these, making the scene twice as terrifying as it might otherwise have been. As I say, I love this scene. While not narratively symbolic as episode 12's might be, the varied use of classic horror movie cinematography and enhanced animation turns this into the show's most fidelically impressive scene. I could go on lamenting its brilliance, but I think I've made my point. So, the scene fades out as we come to the episode ending, with the last point of note being that the next time is just kind of monologuing to herself, capped off by Primal as usual. Join us next time line. Simple but eerie, and once more highly effective. This scene marks the turning point in Kaede's arc, and when we've already discussed how it isn't necessarily the worst thing she ever does, it's pretty high up there. In one action, she releases all her pent-up anger in an act that eviscerates everyone's trust. While she may not claim to have intended any harm, it's worth remembering she's well aware of Asa's illness, which has been wonderfully foreshadowed. And that is what I think the scene's biggest triumph. This is the most dramatic shuffle ever gets without the use of fantasy elements being involved. And what's great is how natural it feels. Kaede isn't hitting Asa because the plot demanded it, nor does Asa's illness come from nowhere. Instead, the entire set piece is carefully built up throughout the show, making this feel incredibly wordy and far removed from the cheap dramatics of lesser dramas. Furthermore, as we've already discussed at length, when talking about Kaede's character, while this is her yandere moment, it's important that however bad it is to shove a sickly individual, this is recoverable from, feeding back into her theme of retribution. I spoke about this in my Full Metal Panic review, but it should once more be noted that I love scenes like these because of how grounded they are. Despite their reputation, rom-com and harem anime are to me some of the most heartfelt out there, without the need for a forced narrative or drama for the sake of drama, or instead presented with well thought out scenes that are grounded in human emotions we can all relate to. To reiterate from earlier, we are meant to sympathise with Kaede even in a scene like this. We're meant to understand her desperation, and I think this moment does a great job of conveying that, while also being a highly entertaining yandere moment. It's an amazing production value. The end of this part. I hope you enjoyed watching. This was quite a long one, and quite a detailed part as the Kaede breakdown scene, so if it helps, feel free to read it if it didn't come across all that well in audio. Anyhow, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.